What you've just seen is security camera footage of Miami mom Patricia Ripley attempting to drown her 9-year-old nonverbal autistic son in a canal before locals rushed to his aid and saved his life. Yeah, really. In the video just shown, little Alejandro gets rescued, but an hour after that incident occurred, his mother would succeed in her attempt to drown him, and nobody would be around to come to the rescue. I'm Brandi, and you're watching Killer Bites. Today's story is a particularly tough one, but it's a story worth hearing about. It's hard to understand how cases like this even happen. You'll want to hear about every twist and turn in this tragic story. In May of 2020, some joggers in Miami had to spring into action when they discovered a 9-year-old boy screaming for help, drowning in a local pond. They dove in after him and managed to pull him out, but they quickly learned that he was nonverbal autistic, so he couldn't explain to anyone exactly how he got into the lake. They all assumed it was an accident when his mother came rushing back with more strangers to help. His mother, Patricia, had been homeschooling him herself since the COVID-19 pandemic lockdown. Her husband, Aldo, has worked as an international trade coordinator at Cargill Food Corporation for over a decade and continued to stay busy with work and spent most of the time out of the house. So Patricia had a lot on her plate to take care of 2 boys, one with special needs that might be hard for her to meet. But she took care of Alejandro full time, and nobody expected that only an hour after he nearly drowned, residents would receive an Amber Alert for little Alejandro. His mother made a frantic call to police and told them that 2 strangers abducted him from her car. So, what is really going on? When Patricia Ripley went to the station during their search for Alejandro, she told police a story like none other they'd heard before. She'd been driving on the highway when her car was sideswiped by an unknown vehicle and ended up forcing her off the road. A man with a knife ran up to her car and demanded money and drugs from her, but when she said she had none, they kidnapped Alejandro from the back seat and left her behind. Patricia said she was too panicked to be able to tell them what the vehicle looked like or what direction they went in once they had her son, but she did include the detail that her assailants were black. Police released an Amber Alert and tried to get a handle on the situation. By all accounts, Alejandro was a sweet, well-behaved kid, and the Ripley family didn't really do anything that would put their son at risk for this sort of thing. Should they be waiting on a ransom note? Was Alejandro targeted on account of his nonverbal autism? A search went on overnight, but approximately 12 hours after Alejandro's Amber Alert was issued, the case would have the worst kind of breakthrough. It wasn't long before Alejandro's body was found floating in a different canal located at the local golf and country club about 4 miles from where Ripley claimed her son was abducted. Investigators at this point were concerned about the near-death incident Alejandro supposedly experienced coincidentally that evening before his kidnapping. Witnesses who helped Alejandro out of the water reported being confused about his mother's whereabouts during the incident. One witness even described Patricia standing motionless as her son shouted for help, just watching. But when police looked back at the CCTV records from nearby, what they found went farther than anyone ever imagined at the time. When they reviewed footage of the scenes, it was clear that Patricia had lured her son to the water and pushed him in herself. In the video, Patricia is seen dragging Alejandro by the hand along the edge of the canal. She stops to talk to him briefly and strokes his hair before pulling him closer to the edge and yanking him into the water. She ran from the bank right away, but witnesses heard her son screaming immediately. It's clear from the tape that Alejandro can't swim, and he remains in the water helpless for a long while as Patricia runs back and forth at the shore, unsure of how to handle the situation from there, as witnesses began rushing towards the scene to help. Only when strangers enter the water to fish Alejandro out before he drowns does his mother do anything to help. When Patricia was confronted with the video evidence, she admitted to making up the kidnapping story that sounded like a Liam Neeson movie, and she confessed to leading her son to the canal where he died and pushing him into the water herself, telling the police that he's going to be in a better place. Nobody was there to save Alejandro from the person he should have been able to trust the most on the earth, his mother. Medical examiners found head trauma on Alejandro's body from some point before his murder. It's possible that Patricia struck him over the head so that he couldn't cry for help the second time, but it's hard to speculate exactly how she did it without video footage of the second drowning. But to police and prosecutors, the footage from earlier that day makes Patricia's intentions very clear. Patricia left him to drown for a second time and drove to a Home Depot parking lot where she sat in her car for 20 minutes before calling in with the truly unbelievable story she had for emergency services that night. But when she came clean, she told them she'd been thinking about killing her son for some time. He'd become so difficult to physically control as he got bigger, she felt as if it justified her actions and demonstrated lack of remorse. Comparisons have been made between Patricia's account of what had happened and the story that Susan Smith gave police before being convicted of killing her 2 children, in which she described an abduction involving a black man who stole her vehicle and her children. However, their story differs when it comes to their spouses. Susan's husband, Alex, said he'd never forget what she'd done. With everyone in the community and the world at large seeking justice against Patricia for her horrendous charge, Patricia's husband, Aldo, conversely has stood by her nonetheless, having told reporters that they both love their son and what police are saying about her is not real. Alejandro is survived by his older brother, Aldo Jr. When his father broke down in front of camera crews after the indictment, the family's lawyer stepped in for him and stated that it's a very, very difficult situation with the family. Everyone is affected. It's a tremendous tragedy what has occurred. By all accounts, she has been an excellent mother, an excellent person, and a great family, as you can see from the people that are here. At this time, we're assembling a legal team in order to make sure that her rights are respected and that she has the opportunity to vindicate her good name and move forward as best she can from this situation. But now, it's important that people recognize this is a good family, that these are people that have led very private lives under very difficult circumstances. With young Alejandro's situation, they've always been very supportive. But the reassurances of Alejandro's good treatment in the press release has been a hard pill for them to swallow, especially when the video evidence corroborating Patricia's role in this unthinkable crime is so devastating to watch. It's hard to imagine going through the COVID-19 lockdowns and having to take care of a child that has special needs like Alejandro. But there's no world in which a parent in a healthy state of mind would have thought this was the solution to their or their child's difficulties. What justification could Patricia Ripley possibly have had for ending her son's life in that horrific way? This case wasn't the only one in which vulnerable people were restricted by the pandemic into sharing spaces with their abusers, but it's a particularly harrowing example of how far things can go when vulnerable, nonverbal people are left to caretakers who are unfit for the role. Alejandro was an innocent child who was working to overcome his challenges. With all the attention the images of his attempted murder have gotten, the videos of him memorializing his time in therapy and with his family showcase the joy and tenacity this boy lived with. And the state of Florida continues to seek justice against his mother for his murder. Patricia's defense and family contend that newfound evidence will vindicate her during her trial, but few other details have been released since she was incarcerated. Only time will tell whether jurors can come to a conclusion about Patricia and her intentions with Alejandro. More than anything, the Ripley family wants people to avoid jumping to conclusions about the case until we know a little more about what's going on here. This has been another very grim case about a broken family, but since the tragedy of Alejandro's death, his brother Aldo has started a fundraiser for Autism Speaks, an advocacy organization that raises awareness for people with autism spectrum disorders in Alejandro's name. Instead of focusing on the tragedy that befell him, Aldo hopes to celebrate the legacy his younger brother has had on the community. And that's the story of Patricia Ripley.